Good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's event, Cross-Cultural Walking Tours, Making Connections in Strathcona. I'm Judith Mosley, Executive Director of Vancouver Heritage Foundation. VHF is a registered charity that promotes the appreciation and conservation of heritage places in Vancouver. We do this through educational programming, special projects, information resources, and grants. And in a wide range of activities that we do, we really strive to highlight the diverse history and cultural heritage of the city. I'd like to acknowledge that the area that we're exploring today is part of the traditional, ancestral and ceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. We're delighted to host this event today. The Cross-Cultural Walking Tours initiative took shape in 2019 with a series of in-person tours in Strathcona and neighbouring Chinatown and Powwow Street. In a really remarkable collaboration of many organisations and individuals and a feat of coordination, the tours had as many as 10 different tour guides for a rich experience of community histories. This year, like for many good things, plans had to change, adapting to an online format, and I'm going to let Carmel talk more about that in a moment. But we're pleased that the panel today will share at least a flavour of the diversity of history, experience and valued places that the tours share. So let's get started. I'm going to introduce the panelists in the order that you'll hear from them this evening. So I'm going to ask all of them actually to just put on their videos so that you can see them as I'm introducing them. So I'm going to start with Carmel. Carmel Tanaka is a community engagement professional and the program coordinator of the Cross-Cultural Walking Tours. After Carmel, you'll hear from Michael Schwartz. Michael is Director of Community Engagement at the Jewish Museum and Archives of BC. Following Michael will be Cor Case. Cor is an actor, artist, activist, designer, event coordinator, and co-founder of Afro Van Connect. Following Cor will be Ainsley Wong. So Ainsley is a director of the Wong's Benevolent Association and a volunteer with Mon Kiang School. Nicola Aguiwara is museum programmer at the Nikkei National Museum and Cultural Centre in Burnaby, and she will be the final panelist to present this evening. So it's going to be really exciting to hear from all of you this evening. Thank you all for taking this on. And I'm going to hand over first to Carmel, who's going to get us started. So I think if all the other panelists want to turn off their video, and we'll give Carmel the floor for the first part.
Thank you so much, Judith and the Vancouver Heritage Foundation. It is a pleasure to be with you here tonight. Thank you to everyone joining as well. I'm Carmel, and I'm with the Cross-Cultural Walking Tours. And yeah, so a little bit about the tours. We celebrate the rich, layered history of Vancouver's downtown east side neighborhoods. We're talking about Hogan's Alley, Jewish Strathcona, Chinatown, the downtown east side, as well as Powwow Street. And yeah, we did this to build awareness of the early contributions of early immigrant communities that called home or called Strathcona home, or to also continue to call Strathcona home then and now, as well as raise awareness on current issues facing residents in the neighborhood to date. And we originally did this in celebration of Vancouver Asian Heritage Month, as well as Jewish Heritage Month, both of which fall during the month of May. And normally we have a lot to pack into our 2-hour tours, and so we don't often have the opportunity to talk about how these tours all got started. So this is a really fun opportunity for me and everyone here on the team to also share a little bit behind the scenes. So it was 3 summers ago, so that's summer of 2018, I went on a James walk that took me through Hogan's Alley, and it was led by the one and only Vanessa Richards, and I learned a lot. Now, 3 years ago, I was 30 years old, grew up in Vancouver, never heard of Hogan's Alley, and it was the first time that I was hearing that there was a Black community. And wanting to know more about what happened in this neighborhood, I was very happy to jump onto Michael Schwartz's tour of Jewish Strathcona, which happened a few weeks later, and also learned a lot there. And while I do come from the Jewish community, my mom doesn't come from Vancouver's Jewish community. So it was really incredible to also learn about how the Jewish community got its start in Vancouver. And you know, I remember like hearing things about my Japanese Canadian side of the family also has their early roots up the road on Powwow Street. So here I am standing on the 800 block of Jackson Avenue. At 800, you've got the National Council of Jewish Women's Neighborhood House, which is the early origins of the Jewish Community Center, which Michael will talk about shortly. And then right across the street at 823 Jackson, you've got Nora Hendricks's Fountain Chapel. And so I'm thinking to myself, wow, there must have been such an incredible life here of all these different communities, and there's got to be stories here. And so that led to an idea to really bring together these communities. Everyone's doing some really awesome tours. Let's have people do those tours and see if we could do something together. And that's part of the jam that I do. I'm a community engagement professional. I really like bringing different communities together to build bridges across silos and to do really cool, rad things together. So initially we had met, and it was, you know, it was an exercise of building trust. Many of these organizations and communities were collaborating for the first time together. And so one of the earliest things that what I did, I'm going to change to the next slide, is I had each group trace on clear projector slides the routes that they go. And I wanted to see if I put them all together, if there would be areas of overlap, because it's the intersection that I was trying to get at. And sure enough, here's a representation of all of those routes overlapped together. And you can see a lot of us were walking the same streets. We were talking about even some of the same houses. And so we started to see, oh, well, maybe there's a way to massage this. And ultimately, we ended up with this route. And we are starting at the elementary school, Lord Strathcona Elementary, going into Jewish Strathcona, heading south into the Italian district, then into Hogan's Alley, up into Chinatown, and then I see here we're going through the downtown east side and then ending around Powwow Street neighborhood. So over the iterations of the tours, we've had to change some of the routes. There was unfortunately a fire at one point that devastated Chinatown, and we needed to make sure that we rerouted accordingly. So yeah, there's a lot of flexibility of where we go, but of course it's in consultation with all of the partners. Yeah, so after settling on the route, we also had to focus and figure out what are we going to talk about, because there are a lot of things we could talk about. There's a lot of direction here. And many of the tour guides who are part of this cross-cultural walking tour have themselves incredible tours that are 2 hours plus that dive really deep into their community histories, which I encourage all of you to do at some point in time. And so here we are asking each tour guide to just choose one, their favorite, or possibly the two of their favorite stops in order to share with people. And that's no easy task at all. But we ended up doing that. And we ended up also focusing on the theme of education, which lent itself nicely because we had also other important issues that we wanted to talk about, heritage and cultural preservation, erasure and gentrification, displacement and dispossession, racism, and the impact of urban renewal on our communities. Many of our communities were affected by all of these things, and we thought it was a great opportunity to share some of this. So naturally, the tour starts at the oldest elementary school, Lord Strathcona Elementary, referred to as the League of Nations for its multicultural makeup. And the school brought and continues to bring many different communities today. This is our first promo picture that we used for our inaugural tours in 2019. That's May 2019. It's courtesy of Beverly Nan, who is over at the Vancouver Asian Heritage Month Society. and she was also a student at Strathcona. And you can see from this photo alone that there was a lot of diversity in the student population. Now, our tours in May 2019, we had 17 partner organizations, and we thought that was incredible, and it actually, we felt it, and other people felt it as well. We even won an award of merit for community engagement, for excellence actually in community engagement from the BC Museums Association. Now, the next photo is our epic photograph that was taken on our first tour on May 5th, 2019. We have Vanessa Richards in the center. You can see Michael Schwartz in the back there, and we are walking down Hogan's Alley. And we were really thankful that it was a gorgeous day. Unbeknownst to many people, our trial run through was in April, and we were hailed on, and we had an inch of hail, and we had to all huddle under the stairs of Strathcona Elementary School and wait for this inch of hail to pass. So yeah, so it was great that we scored with great weather, and it was also a great way to bond. So after a month of every Sunday having both an AM and PM tour, where we took 15 to 20 people out. Of course, there were a bunch of stragglers who decided to join as well along the way. Each tour had 10 guides. Essentially, it was a pass the baton situation where we would flip the mics, and there would be a different tour guide at every stop and take you along the journey. And we finished our celebration on a very strong note. We sold out in 2 weeks. We were very happy. We actually sold out before we got our posters back from the printers. So we ended up using that for part of your goodie bag in your lunch. Anyway, we ended at the end of May, and we started to make plans for the future. And we really didn't want this to be a one-off. We wanted to continue to collaborate together, and we've seen a number of projects and collaborations to come from this, and so it's really beautiful to see this ripple effect of all of us working together. And we also knew that we needed funding. Many of us were volunteers, including myself, and we are not a nonprofit. We are a conglomeration of many nonprofits, but the Cross Cultural Walking Tours is not its own nonprofit. So we found ourselves ineligible for a lot of funding opportunities. We looked into potentially becoming a social enterprise. That is still very much a possibility. We were in talks with the city of Vancouver, particularly city planning and cultural services for their support, and thought things were lined up, or at least lining up, and we had a whole plan for what we're going to do for May 2020, and then COVID hit, and so we had to reimagine everything. Yeah, not only did we, as the Cross Cultural Walking Tour, had to figure out what we were going to do, but also each partner organization had to figure out what they're going to do, and then the individuals within those organizations. So there was a lot of uncertainty. But we met the leadership committee. Many of the members who are presenting today are a part of the leadership committee of the Cross Cultural Walking Tours. We met on Zoom. It was our first time meeting on Zoom, and we decided to pivot, and we launched what ended up being a 4-month social media campaign that ran from May through to the end of August. And it was a free virtual offering that you can find till today on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Our social media handle is Cross Cultural Tours, at Cross Cultural Tours. And we invited our partners from the previous year to present, and also anyone who showed interest following, and then a bunch of new ones. And to our surprise, we went from 17 partner organizations to 31 partner organizations, and there's a lot of reasons for that. You know, the popularity of the tours from the year before, but also more accessibility, especially for a lot of these organizations. They're like 1 or 2 people. They don't have the capacity to be a tour guide standing at a stop at 12:17 waiting for a cohort of people, because they're the only ED that can tend to all of the things in their organization. So it was really great to be able to amplify even more voices, which was one of the priorities that we identified at the end of our May 2019 tours. And also, a lot of us have existing digital material that we've put a lot of work into. And so this was a way for us to share and have it all be in one place, but then people can go and click and then find new stuff. And so that was really awesome. And as you can see from the numbers, we reached a lot of people. Our reach on social media increased to a number that I couldn't even have dreamed of. Also, it's way more than what we could have done impact-wise with our in-person tours. So that's something that we need to look at as a leadership executive committee to find out what are we going to do for May 2021. You know, there's a lot of decisions that we need to make. So speaking of which, there is a post-event evaluation that you're going to have to fill out. And one of the questions that I would like to pose to you, if you don't mind me taking advantage of the fact that you're here listening to us, is would you pay $15 to join a virtual cross-cultural walking tour? The question is yes or no. This is a good way for us to gauge if we should be continuing for May 2021 with a virtual offering. Again, we did it this year as volunteers. Myself included. So we need to find a way to keep it sustainable. Now, before COVID, we were just in the midst of developing an option for private tours where we would take a cohort of 15 people, and then we would have 3 or 4 tour guides of your choice or whoever was available. And, you know, it was a less amount. It wasn't the usual 10. And we tested this out with the Strathcona Business Improvement Association, as well as the BC Social Studies Teachers Association. And we noticed that there was quite a want and a desire to learn more, which was incredible. And it was also would be a great way to sustain and support the tour guides who are participating. So speaking of teachers, I know that there are a bunch of teachers in the audience today. Thank you, Jessica, for bringing them here. And yeah, it's important because one of our priorities that we had identified, which we had to put on hold, is developing our tours in partnership with teachers to develop a teaching module that brings the classroom to the community voices through the walking tour. And, you know, we would be more than happy to carry on this conversation. One of our partners who participated in our virtual offering this year is a local teacher in the neighborhood in Strathcona, Maya McDonald. And she definitely tried to get that conversation going. And I'm sure if you all wanted to reach out, she would love to hear from you. Yeah, another question that I would love to ask you in the post-event evaluation is, say things are as they are right now in terms COVID-wise, would you feel comfortable attending in-person tours with a maximum of 15 people who are masked and keeping 2 meters distance per tour? And that's also, again, a yes or no question. So that is enough from me. You will now hear from 4 of our guides to get a little taste of what you would normally have gotten on our tours. Usually I grab something really yummy for you to all enjoy and to nosh on, and also to support local businesses. But unfortunately, this is a virtual event, so I cannot force feed you. And yeah, we're going to keep our presentations short. So that we have more time for the Q&A, because that's usually where the juiciest tidbits come out, when you have an opportunity to ask us questions. And just so that you know, because of the pass the baton format of our tours, not all the tour guides come with us to the very end of the tour because they're standing waiting for another group to come. So this is really a great opportunity to have us all together at one time. Yeah, really looking forward to reflecting with you on the future of our tours, as well as the future of this neighborhood. There's a lot of plans for development for the neighborhood, and as community voices who are connected to Strathcona, we want to be a part of the conversation. So thank you for having us. I'm now going to pass it off to Michael.
Thanks, Carmel. Hi, can everyone see me? I'm Michael. I'm the Director of Community Engagement at the Jewish Museum and Archives of BC. There, now I almost see my face. Thanks to the Heritage Foundation for having us today, for all of you for joining us. I'm very happy to tell you a bit about the Jewish history in Strathcona. For about 70 years, from the 1870s through the 1940s, Strathcona was the heart of the Vancouver Jewish community. Just a short walk from the commercial hub of Gastown, it was where most working class Jewish families made their homes. amongst many working class families from diverse backgrounds. These families arrived in a series of waves of migration. In this photo, we see the first wave, representatives of the first wave, who came from the gold fields of California by way of Victoria in the mid to late 1800s. Acclimatized to North American culture during the California gold rush, they understood the need for hotels, bars, and supply shops, supporting prospectors staking their claim here in BC. Here we have Sylvester Feed Co., one such shop in Victoria. Now, Victoria was the entry point to the territory of British Columbia, which at the time was not yet a Canadian province. The first recorded Jewish families arrived there in 1858, and by 1863, just 5 years later, the community had grown rapidly enough to support the creation of an impressive synagogue, Congregation Emmanuel, which still stands today, over 150 years later. There's Congregation Emmanuel. It looks very much the same after much restoration today at the corners of Blanchard and Pandora. As you can see, it was the edge of town then, and the rest of the city has grown up around it. Now, in the 1870s, a few intrepid entrepreneurs saw the promise of Granville Township, a small smattering of shops on the Burrard Inlet that over a decade later would become Vancouver. Here we have Gold House, an early hotel established by Louis Gold on Water Street. Settling in Vancouver was a real gamble at the time. There was very little reason to believe that the Transcontinental Railway would come all the way here. The good money was on Port Moody or New Westminster, both much more well-established towns. Here's another shop on Cordova Street. Now, growth was slow over the first couple of decades, with new Jewish immigrants arriving from Eastern Europe, where religious persecution made the future bleak for the younger generation. Some came directly to the West Coast, but most spent a few years in Montreal, Winnipeg, or small farm settlements in the Canadian prairies. The Canadian government was very eager to bring new immigrants to the young country and gave away land for next to nothing, especially in the prairies. And after you had staked your claim and developed the land, then you have citizenship and move on to bigger towns. Now, whereas Victoria had grown fast enough to enable the creation of Congregation Emmanuel within 5 years of the first arrivals, Vancouver was far slower, taking until 1911, almost 40 years after the first arrivals, before B'nai Yehuda, the synagogue here, was built. Now, B'nai Yehuda, this building still stands at the corners of Heatley and Pender. We are looking at it here from the Heatley side. Front faces onto Pender, and in the back you can see to the right of your screen there's a pale building that looks similar facade. That was the original synagogue. There were 3 houses across that were knocked down when they expanded in 1919 to build the larger synagogue. The building is still there, but it has been condominiums since the 1970s. And the residents have told us that they can still hear spirits in the courtyard, happy spirits. And here's a photo of the interior of some of the congregation praying inside the synagogue. So in the intervening years, in the 40 years before the synagogue was built, services had been held regularly in private homes and in rented halls. They rented various halls for large gatherings. The community coexisted with many other immigrant groups. As the old-timers say, they lived cheek to jowl, with Jewish, Italian, Polish, Ukrainian, Chinese, Japanese, and Black families living in adjacent homes, or suites of the same home even, and children attending school together, as Carmel alluded to. While the synagogue was a vital part for the community, it was certainly not the only one. Dozens of community groups were established during this time, often beginning around kitchen tables. Organizations like Hadassah, National Council of Jewish Women, which we see here in a photo from the 70s, the Hebrew Free Loan Association, B'nai B'rith, and Talmud Torah Day School supported a tight-knit community. gave members social purpose, and many continue to operate to this day. By the 1930s, many Jewish families had established enough of a toehold to move to new neighborhoods like Mount Pleasant and Fairview, both suburbs created as a byproduct of the new Broadway streetcar line. The opening of the Jewish Community Center at 11th and Oak in 1928 marked the arrival of this trend of migration. This is that JCC. Some will recognize it as a building that still stands as the Lund Association building across from PGH. Some families remained in Strathcona, but their numbers declined over the 30s, 40s, and 50s. After the war, the Jewish population grew substantially, in line with general population growth throughout the city. In 1950, the Canadian Pacific Railway released to the city of Vancouver a massive patch of forest spanning from Main Street to Granville Street, from 41st to 57th. The heart of this area would become the neighborhood of Oakridge, the heart of the Jewish community for the next half century. Shocking as it may be here, this road, this dirt road that we're looking at, is Cambie Street at about 49th Avenue. So you can see the potential and the massive changes that would occur. So that's my story. I'm going to pass on the mic to Core and look forward to chatting with everyone at the question section. Thanks a lot.
Hi, everybody. My name is Core. I am one of the founders of Afro Van Connect, and I'm excited to be here to discuss with you some of the history of the historical Black neighborhoods in BC, specifically in the Lower Mainland. This is Hogan's Alley. In the 1930s and 40s, Hogan's Alley was an immigrant enclave with bustling neighborhood with restaurants, Sun-style colleges, and this expansive, lovely, powerful, strong people of African descent. Like Michael alluded to in I believe 1885, majority of people of African descent migrated into this territory. There was a year called the Year of Archuli, in which there was a freed slave who was journeying from the south to the area of California with his slave master at the time. Once he reached California, California did not have any laws against slavery, so he wanted to free himself. His decision to free himself caused an upheaval at that time in that community, as many free Blacks who lived in California were able to generate money and awfully pay and buy their family members who lived in the South's freedom. This tension that festered because of Archuli wanted to free himself in relation to the hotbed of issues related to slavery and freedom, there became an issue and a law that was trying to be passed in California at the time. It was Bill 332, which wanted to make it illegal for people of African descent to be in California without a license. So basically the tension in the space at that time was not ideal for people of African descent. And so when the colony of Vancouver, British Columbia was being created, Sir James Douglas around that time synonymously reached out to neighborhoods and individuals, communities who would be interested in coming to BC, who would be loyal to this new land and new colony was made, as well as to him. And so this seemingly would seem to be an opportunity for people of African descent, free slaves in the lower southern areas to come forth up into Canada. And synonymously, this kind of aligned with the gold rush that was happening at the time. So there was a lot of opportunities and potentially for a better life for people of African descent. Hogan's Alley was also right next to the Canadian train station. And Vancouver was the last stop of the train section. And this provided a lot of jobs for local people of African descent. And the majority of the men in the Hogan's Alley community would work as porters at these train stops. These train stops provided these people of African descent with opportunities to take care of their family, as well as a lot of the women that also lived in these communities found some work around these areas, as well as creating speakeasies and restaurants to also support themselves in the community. And these are two of the women who are quite prominent within the Hogan's Alley community and the history. The lady on the right, her name is Vi. She had a restaurant called Aunt Vi's. It was a speakeasy restaurant that served, and it was the center of the nightlife in the community. It was a place for a lot of famous faces, because being that the train station was right adjacent to Hogan's Alley, a lot of acts that would come from the South would often come and reach the last stop of their tour would be in the Hogan's Alley area. And then naturally they would come to look for something to eat, and they would also often end up at Aunt Vi's. So notable names are like Alice Fitzgerald, Lena Horne, Louis Armstrong, Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Nat King Cole. And this area in the community did not only just attract artists and celebrities, but also made some amazing legendary acts as well, like one being Jimi Hendrix. And if you can see on the right, this woman over here, her name is Nora Hendricks, who is actually Jimi Hendrix's grandmother in this photo. And we're going to talk a little bit more about her. Nora Hendricks, if you see, this is the Fountainhead Church Chapel. Nora Hendricks moved to Hogan's Alley in the 1920s and 1960s. And through efforts with other community members, they were able to build the first Black church in the area, which is called the Fountain Chapel. The Fountain Chapel was the center and the heart of the community life and the cornerstone of Black life at the time, and it still exists today. Unfortunately, it is not in the possession of the community because it was sold to private owner in 1985, I believe, but you can still see the building if you do end up going to Hogan's Alley. And actually taking the opportunity to see physically how the space looked. It's quite a beautiful building. As we can see right here, I think Carmel alluded to a lot of the issues related to erasure and the urban renewal project, as well as disenfranchisement. And this also took place in relation to the only historical Black neighborhood in BC. And this was not a phenomenon. This actually happened quite often in the 1960s, as there was an automotive boom that was taking place, and a lot of neighborhoods, urban neighborhoods, were being disenfranchised, and Hogan's Alley was no exception. The Urban Renewal Project wanted to erect a highway right through Hogan's Alley and some parts of Chinatown. However, because of protests, they were not successful in actually creating the highway, but they did create the Georgia Viaduct. And subsequently, what the viaduct did is it basically removed the western part of Hogan's Alley. And basically, because of that, it forced community members to seek other places to live within the city, as well as even migrating out of the country because of just the lack of access to space and community. Somebody asked the question, yes, what streets define Hogan's Alley? Hogan's Alley is, it's on Gore Avenue, 2 blocks east of Jackson Avenue and 1 block west of Main Street. So if you go right by the viaduct, literally they have also, which is pretty much the future, but they have implemented or created modular housing named after Nora Hendricks. It's called Nora Hendricks Place. It's right alongside of the viaduct, and there's a beautiful mural there that depicts the history of people of African descent who lived in the community, as well as alluding to, I guess, future aspirations of what that neighborhood could become. With the recent conversations about the viaduct and basically the demolishing of that and the expansion of the northeast Falls Creek area, a lot of people in the African descent community are questioning and bringing up the awareness of Hogan's Alley and the necessity of seeking some level of atonement or honoring the communities that were previous there and that were forced to move and were marginalized because of issues of the Urban Renewal Project. Presently, there are various organizations who are having discussions about this. One of our organizations being my own, Afro Connect, and our intention is to basically, it's a collective of African descent artists, creatives, professionals, students, curators, designers, working to promote and create culture of people of African descent. Because as we see within the city, since the erasure of Hogan's Alley, there has not really been spaces for people of African descent to congregate. there's still no actual community center or established building or space that honors and reflects the culture of people of African descent in the Lower Mainland. And as I just explained, there has been a very large history and a very important history that helps shape this community. And I think that it's very important that we honor all cultures and all people. And I think that's why it's beautiful what Carmel is doing here with the cross-cultural tour. Cultural tour is basically highlighting and giving people opportunity to learn and to hopefully engage and learn about different communities that that are in BC, that are thriving and that are emerging. So that's all. Thank you. I will hand off my baton to Ainsley.
Thanks so much, Cor. Ngoka Menghai Wang Lai Jun. My name is Ainsley Wong, and I'm a fourth generation Chinese Canadian settler. I'm going to be bringing you into the Chinatown portion, and I think what's notable about the Chinatown part of the tour is that we're talking about the living history of the streets of Chinatown, and we're going to be talking about the past, present, and future of Chinatown in Vancouver. The streets of Chinatown are particularly important to me. The buildings in Chinatown hold the stories of my community's resiliency and determination in spite of systemic racism. Starting in the 1880s, Chinese labor was used in the construction of the Canadian Pacific Railway. And these workers were recruited at very low pay to handle the most dangerous and difficult sections of track through the Fraser Canyon. And it is said that there's one dead Chinese worker for every mile of track through the Rocky Mountains to Vancouver. My great-grandfather was one of the early railway workers. He came here as a young teen, and at the conclusion of the railway, he became a settler in the interior of BC where he was a farmer, but many railway workers moved on to Vancouver. The early Chinese immigrants in Vancouver's Chinatown, and actually Chinatowns across North America, they were from the Seiyap, that's the 5 counties region of Guangdong province in southern China. This is a rural area close to Hong Kong. It's about, the combined land mass of the 5 counties is about the size of the state of Delaware. And they speak dialects of the Cantonese language in these areas. In the early days, there were land pressures such as famine, poverty, and war. And so young men were sent across to North America, which they called Gold Mountain, in search of better opportunities so that they could send money back home to China. Vancouver was known as Saltwater City. And right now, this year in 2020, there's a brand new neon light installation by artist Paul Wong. And this has just gone up this summer. And it's in the laneway of the 400 block Main Street. And it pays tribute to the early name Saltwater City. And it's actually located behind the site of Vancouver's original City Hall. We like to pay tribute to the early members of our community because it was a hard scramble for ethnic Chinese. After the railway was finished in 1885, there was a strong element of racism, and there was a lot of fear that Chinese workers would steal jobs. And that resulted in Canada removing the welcome mat for Chinese people. Canada implemented a head tax, which only applied to Chinese workers. It started at $50. It was raised to $100 and then later $500. Then in 1923, not only was the welcome mat removed, but the door was slammed shut. The head tax was replaced by the Chinese Exclusion Act, and the workers who had come across to Canada remained separated from their families until 1947. And for those Chinese who were born here, they were not given citizenship. Prior to 1947, everyone born in Canada was considered a British subject unless you were a person of color, and that included Chinese people. 3 of my 4 grandparents were born in Canada, and they were considered aliens, not British subjects. And we've just found their identification papers recently from this period, which give testament to that fact. Along with not having citizenship, there were other discriminatory laws. In the city of Vancouver, Chinese people could not vote. They couldn't own property outside certain restricted areas. They couldn't work for the city or swim in a public pool. And at the movie theater, people of color, including Chinese people, needed to sit in the balcony. So understandably, Chinatown felt like a safe haven for people of color, for Chinese people, where they lived and worked and they found services such as getting a haircut or having a suit made or having their picture taken. There's a lovely collection of photographs that was published in a book this year by local curator Catherine Clement. And these were photographs taken by a renowned photographer named Yucho Chow, who served people of color, not just the Chinese community, through his photo studio. So some of the people who are featured in this collection are residents of Hogan's Alley, Aboriginal families, and also early immigrants from continental Europe. So Chinatown and the restaurants in Chinatown also served people of color who were not welcome to eat in other parts of Vancouver at that time. Later in the 1960s, it became popular for people from the west side of Vancouver to come down to Chinatown and to frequent the Chinatown dinner clubs, such as the Marco Polo. And the Marco Polo was remarkable. They created the first they invented the Chinese smorgasbord in Canada. So the Marco Polo had this extensive smorgasbord and nightclub entertainers, including musicians from Hogan's Alley, including an up-and-coming Jimi Hendrix at that time. And today, there are still many, many restaurants and businesses in Chinatown who, of course, suffering due to COVID and development gentrification pressures. And one of the most popular cafes right now is the Newtown Bakery, which serves famous apple tarts and steamed bao. During the live cross-cultural walking tour, we often had pastries from Newtown Bakery that we were serving to people at our next stop. So this is the Wong's Association across the street from Newtown Bakery at 123 East Pender Street. And we're going to be going up a tall flight of stairs all the way up to the 4th floor. The picture on the left is the 4th floor of the building, and this is our ancestral hall. The Wong's Association is an example of a Chinese clan society. And this organization was started in 1921, and it was foundational in supporting Wongs who came from southern China. In cities all across North America, there were Chinatowns that sprung up, and most of the clan societies were either organized by last name or by the village or region that you came from. And they all had similar aims as the Wongs, and they were a mutual aid society. In the early days, when migrant workers first got off the boat, their first stop was the Clan Association. So they'd go into Chinatown, the Wongs would come to the Wongs Association, and there they would get set up with a place to live, a job. They would be able to send money and letters back home. A lot of the early workers were literate. And it was also a place for family and social support because the early workers were bachelors, and that made up the bulk of Chinatown's population. So gradually there were more families in the Chinese community, and the Wongs opened Mon Kiang School in 1925. Here's a picture of my dad from the mid-1940s at Mon Kiang School. The aim of Mon Kiang School, which is on the 3rd floor of the Wong's building, was to provide a classical Cantonese education to Canadian-born children in Chinatown. And in the 1930s, Mon Kiang was one of 10 Chinese schools in the neighborhood. The children attended Strathcona School during the day, and in the afternoon from 4 o'clock until the evening, they went to Chinese school, which was strict. They also went on Saturday mornings. So these kids had to study for 2 sets of exams at English school and at Chinese school. And it was generally considered boring and not a lot of fun. So why did they do it? Well, in the early days, besides speaking dialects of Cantonese at home, the kids in Chinatown grew up and they were expected that they were going to live and work within the confines of Chinatown. So even if they found Chinese school boring, it was considered important for them to be able to read and write so that they could conduct business in Chinese. Throughout the 50s and 60s in Chinatown, the classrooms at Mon Kiong and the other schools were full, but there was outward migration starting in the 1970s, and that's when Chinese families were moving all across Metro Vancouver, not just in Chinatown. And there were Chinese language schools that popped up in community centers and churches and elementary schools all over, so that Chinese Canadian kids could take classes closer to home. But there were other pressures too. There were efforts to assimilate into Canadian society, and a lot of families thought it was more important, including my own family, to do extracurricular activities like sports and other clubs at school instead of going to Chinese school. So with these changing demographics and the declining enrollments, the majority of Chinese schools that were run by clan societies closed, and Mon Kiong School was among them, and we closed the doors in 2011. Today in Chinatown, Cantonese is considered an endangered language against the pressures of Mandarin, and there are local efforts to keep the Cantonese language going. And in Vancouver, they're led by UBC and Youth Collaborative for Chinatown. So on the left is a poster from the Saturday School when Mon Kiong School reopened in 2016. And we reopened with a community program that offered a different way to teach and learn Cantonese. And it was run by Youth Collaborative for Chinatown and UBC, and Youth Collaborative for Chinatown was also one of the founding organizations of the cross-cultural walking tour. In this model of learning Cantonese, it was a very unique place-based model where students learned their vocabulary for an hour inside Mon Kiong School, and then they took to the streets so that they could go practice what they'd learned in a very practical way to go shopping and go eat in restaurants. So the Wong's Association is trying to keep their buildings going, and it's not easy having two heritage buildings on Pender Street. This is our other building at 27 East Pender Street, which holds the Hansing Athletic Association in the upper floors. But in the storefront, we're really pleased right now that we're holding the Chinese Canadian Museum. And this gallery is open from Friday to Sunday every week by reservation. It's a free museum, and the exhibit, A Seat at the Table, is really phenomenal. And it's a great look at the past families through their stories through food in Chinatown. And I think that concludes the Chinatown portion of the tour. And now I feel like I should be running the headset to Powwow Street to meet up with Nicola.
Hi, I'm Nicola from the Nikkei National Museum. I'd like to thank the Vancouver Heritage Foundation for hosting this online. I would like to start with this early image of Malay, which translates to big leaf maple trees. It was the site of a Coast Salish seasonal village. Hastings Sawmill started production here in 1867. The city of Vancouver lies on unceded Coast Salish territory, and many First Nations continue to call this area home and feel a strong connection to the area. The origin of Powwow Street Japanese Canadian community can be traced to this sawmill. The first known Japanese immigrant to work at Hastings Sawmill was Takezo, known only by his first name, who appears in the records in 1883. By 1889, over 200 Japanese workers were employed at the mill. The earliest workers first lived in floating sculls and fishing boats on Burrard Inlet and at the foot of Gore Avenue, but rooming houses quickly sprang up to meet the emerging needs. Services such as food shops, barbers, laundry, and recreational facilities were quick to follow, and the community established itself. So the area in orange, the upper part, became the commercial hub for all Japanese immigrants in BC. It grew and thrived over a 50-year period from the 1890s to 1942. It was commonly referred to by its residents as Powwow Street or Pauwerugai. It was roughly bounded by Hastings Street to the south, Burrard Inlet to the north, Princess Street and Main Street to the west. And its heydays were the 1930s up to 1942. Vancouver was incorporated as a city in 1886 and streets were laid. The Powwow Street area's original white middle-class residents were first to receive water, electricity, sewage, and streetcar service. However, by the 1890s, these prosperous middle-class families moved out, leaving Powwow Street to be settled by Japanese immigrants. At first, they gathered here to work at Hastings Sawmill. Then there were labor business in the area. Then boarding houses were required, then services and shops supplying and making unique foods for the Japanese. In 1887, regular steamship service between Yokohama and Canada began, and between 1906 and 1908, more than 9,000 Japanese immigrants entered Canada. On September 7, 1907, instigated by the Asiatic Exclusion League, a mob of about 9,000 rampaged through Chinatown and Powwow Street, smashing windows and destroying properties. As a result, in 1908, Japan and Canada signed a gentleman's agreement, which limited Japanese immigration to 400 men a year. Wives, children, returning immigrants, students, and clergy were excluded from this quota. The Japanese community in Canada began to change from a community of single working-age men to a community of family groups as wives and children began to arrive. Since time is limited, I'll just focus on one story from the neighborhood, which is the impressive Tamura building on the corner of Powell and Dunleavy, the west of Oppenheimer. Tamura building. Shinkichi Tamura established the Japan-Canada Trust Savings Company in 1907. Tamura was Canada's first trade commissioner to Japan. In 1912, Tamura commissioned architects Townsend and Townsend, which was a prolific architecture firm at the time, to design a 4-story building. So this is quite unique in the way that a Japanese person actually built a building in this neighborhood. Upon completion, the Tamura building became the base for many establishments. Ground floor facing Powell Street was a bank, an insurance agency, a fish market, a cafe, a confectionery store, and a drugstore. Exporters for logging, salt salmon and herring, marine suppliers, and shipping set up shops on the ground floor facing Dunleavy. Throughout the upper floors of the building were offices occupied by a doctor, a psychic, a dentist, and a dressmaker. The New Canadian was a Japanese-Canadian newspaper that occupied the second floor of the Tamura building. In 1938, the paper's young staff first published in English only, aiming for a readership of second-generation Nikkei. Significantly, the New Canadian was the only Japanese newspaper granted printing permission during the Second World War. During the Japanese-Canadian internment, the BC Security Commission used this paper as a way to communicate with the Japanese community. The New World Hotel shared the second floor with the New Canadian. The hotel served as residential housing for out-of-town university students and labor workers. Research from the Landscapes of Injustice project has revealed more about the fate of this building and the impact of dispossession on the Japanese Canadian community. And this is where ideally I'll just pop out those pink letters that are on the screen. So in 1943, the custodian of enemy property sold the Tamura building for $31,500. Less than half of what Shinkichi Tamura's son Toru paid for it when he bought it from his father 7 years earlier in 1936, and less than the market value, which was $50,000. 16 years later, in 1959, the building sold again, more than doubling the 1943 investment. The building is currently registered in the Vancouver Heritage Registry and completed restoration work in 2017, which has returned the storefronts, sheet metal pediments, and cornices to their original appearance. In an exuberant Edwardian commercial style, the architects incorporated elaborate and overstated rooftop cornices, pediments, and columns. The use of massive urn elements were likely Japanese cultural influences. The intent was to restore the storefronts to their original appearance, including the original alcove configuration and depth. The tile-based surfaces, wood framing, and tempered laminated storefront glazing. The number of social housing units remained the same after restoration. If you're interested in learning more about the research on Japanese Canadian dispossession during the 1940s, visit our new exhibit, Broken Promises, at the Nikkei National Museum in Burnaby. The exhibit is on until next spring. And this slide briefly shows a map of 1941, the ownership by Japanese Canadian businesses, and then post-war 1949, where there is only a bit there. The history of Powwow Street has been documented and is accessible in publications, which are available at the Nikkei National Museum gift shop. Today, I would like to share some untold stories of Japanese Canadians who live just outside the boundaries of Powwow Street to illustrate the multi-ethnic character of Strathcona. So I'm going back to the Strathcona school where we usually start the tour. Japanese immigrants attended Strathcona School during the day. In the year 1937, witnessed a record enrollment of 1,458 students, and more than half were Japanese. At this time, the Canadian-born children with Japanese parents formed a large part of this group. However, many Japanese students and their teens enrolled in the school, with special language classes being set up. Students have fond memories of Strathcona School. Asako Mary Seki was 6 years old in 1936 and has happy memories. She especially remembers that her love for music started with music classes with Miss Leverock. In 1942, 9,000 Canadians in Vancouver were forced to give up their homes, businesses, and possessions because of the alleged threat they posed to Canada. In Strathcona, the removal of Japanese community was very evident, as many Japanese-run grocery stores closed and many homes were left vacant. The school lost half of its student population. This is one place that was built in 1901 for Edwin Cassidy. This building was a grocery store run by various owners until 1975. The Japanese Takezo Ota family ran it from 1929 to 1942. The upper story was residential, typically used by the operator of the grocery store. Midge Ayukawa grew up on the Georgia and Wheatley. She describes the area as a cosmopolitan area with all kinds of kids, Ukrainian, Polish, Italian, and Japanese, who played together in English. And one of the short-lived businesses at 810 Union Street in the 1930s to 40s was the economy store run by Heijiro Matsubayashi. The Royal Grocery at 701 Hawks Avenue was owned by Mr. Otsuji. By 1941, Japanese Canadian families lived in 3 of the 7 units in the building. He sold the grocery store in 1940 and bought a small hotel business in Strathcona, but he didn't have time to sell it before leaving the city, so just left it. 898 East Georgia Street at Campbell Avenue. Campbell Avenue Grocery was run by Yoshio Hanada from 1955 to 1962, a rare example of returning Japanese Canadian after the internment. So I'm kind of jumping back into that yellow square that I showed at the start. After 1949, when Japanese Canadians were allowed to the coast, a number of commercial establishments such as Aki Restaurant, Shimizu Shoten, and K Seafood came to this area. The Japanese Buddhist temple and the Japanese language school revived in the 1950s, but Powwow Street as a Japanese Canadian community never regained its former glory. So this image is the Japanese, the Buddhist temple on Jackson and Powell, just east of Powell, Oppenheimer Park. And I'll finish with the Vancouver Japanese Language School and Japanese Hall, which is on Alexander Street and Jackson. The language school was named a National Historic Site just last year for its role as the oldest and largest Japanese language school in the country, but also because it is a rare documented case of property returned to Japanese Canadians following the period of internment. And that concludes my little tour today. Thank you.
Thank you to all the panelists for your presentations. I think there's so much to pack in, and I think it's, you know, so cruel to make you only have just 10 minutes or so to share a little bit of the history. But I think hopefully it's given everyone at least a sense of the connections to be made in the neighborhood and the really diverse history, and how there's so much of that that's still to be found there today, and it's very much still part of the neighborhood. It's not just in the past. We do have a bit of time for some discussion and questions, so I'm going to just start things off with a question. I know all of you are really involved in sharing community history, and in not just through the Walking Tours initiative, but through your own organizations, and really involved in public education. But has this project had particular importance for you? And I wondered if you wanted to comment on that. Who would like to begin?
I could say something, I guess. I've been leading tours, the Jewish history of Strathcona since 2012, 2013. And walking through those streets, I knew peripherally that there were all these different histories there, but I didn't actually know any of it in depth. And felt that there was something there, that if we get the right people in the room, something exciting could happen. So it was really exciting to be able to work with everybody and to have Carmel come in as a real leader to really wrangle everyone together, and to get to know the history from each of you and from the rest of our partners was really exciting. And even tonight, I've learned more. Everyone kind of riffed on their script and added a bit here and there, and we had more time not having to do all the walking. So while we didn't get to see the actual places in person, we still got plenty more information. And I think that each of us have, you know, since doing the initial run of tours, have had a couple of years to even learn more about our own subject matter. You know, we're always learning, getting deeper into it. So it's very exciting to constantly see the city I grew up in through these different lenses. And the other outcome of this whole thing has been a real exciting community, just meeting the rest of our partners and, everyone here and the rest of them who couldn't make it this evening really, feels more exciting because, as a small nonprofit, you sometimes feel that you're alone in the wilderness, and to know that there are similar groups representing their communities doing the same kind of work is reaffirming, and you feel a little less alone. So it's been really exciting. It's been great.
Great. Would anyone else like to comment on just how this project does it have particular importance for you at this time even?
I'd say definitely. I think it's been really transformative. I think a lot of the times, especially with the idea of erasure and not knowing what's there and being in a space and being like, I'm here, but who's done this before? Who's walked this land before? And what have they aspired to do? And like, am I doing anything new, or am I adding on to something? And I feel like what this has offered, I think everyone and hopefully people continuing in the future, is realizing that you're part of something larger, and that and also that you can have a greater impact within your community than you really know that you can. And that's the most exciting thing, that we could continue the work of our ancestors and continue to build in the direction to hopefully be more equitable and inclusive for everyone to feel like they have a space to share their voice and not be alone, and to be like, I can actually stand in solidarity with other communities because I know about other communities. I know about their history. I'm not like, oh, I don't know what, like, I'm just going to allow you to be out here hang by yourself. No, I can support you and honor you. And I think that's the main thing of what this is offering. I think people in the city is that more connectivity, and I guess hopefully dissolving those little silos and creating a more hopefully whole space. And I'm just really excited about that. And I think that definitely is the future. And I think that more communication like this is so necessary. And I think I'm like super think it's essential. Like it should just be a part of everything. Like it really just should. If you come to Vancouver, you should know about the tour. You should be able to know about other cultures, who's been here, what they're doing, so you can add. Because I think there's a lot of people that come into this space that are like, where do I go? What do I do? Who's doing what? And you have no idea. And I think that it's nice that there's beginning to become cultural awareness, so people can support. Like, I'll know about your event, I could come and support you, and I could show solidarity, and you're not alone. So I think that's a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really, really important. Very, very important connections to be made. Yeah. Anyone else want to add to that?
Sure. Or Ainsley, go ahead.
Oh, hi, Carmel. I think I can just add that I mean, for me personally, I was so excited to get involved in this project. I grew up on the streets of Strathcona because my grandmother babysat me. So I was used to walking the tour route. So just to be able to get involved with the different groups and learn the history of the buildings and the stories of the people within them, that was just huge for me. But for my organization, for the Wong's Association, for a living, breathing Chinese clan society that tends to be pretty inward looking, I think it was pretty transformational. And in 2019, we definitely did the tour at the right time. They're not used to opening the door to strangers. It's usually, the buildings and the programs are for their members, and there's, I don't want to say secrecy about it, but just they tend to keep to themselves. And just for them to be able to be part of a larger group where we had the large number of partner organizations, we had the people coming through the building every Sunday. It was definitely the warm-up exercise for becoming involved in the Chinese Canadian Museum. And I don't think that some of the initiatives that we're doing today would have happened without the initial steps with the cross-cultural tour.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, an important catalyst for sure. Yeah, Carmel, you had a comment?
Yeah, actually, Ainsley said something that I was going to say, that it was, my understanding was one of the first times that anyone was allowed into the Monkeyong school. And like, like outside of the Wong community and outside of the Chinese Canadian community. And so I felt very honored that we were able to even go in. And one of the best memories that I have, we had a bunch of tourists, Jewish tourists from New York, who, as they were like trying to get up the stairs, they eventually get in and they're sitting down in these little tiny tables that you still have the original OG's desks. And they're like, wow, it feels like I'm back in Yiddish school. And so just to see a lot of similarities and that we're not so different after all was really important. And for me, building trust between the communities was super huge. I did talk about that earlier. A lot of our communities, I'm just gonna like put it out there, like we're small nonprofits fighting for the same grants, same funding opportunities. And so it's really wonderful to be able to collaborate together and do something beautiful, because you don't often have that opportunity. And we met for about a year, I think, 8 or 9 months monthly till we got to May 2019 tours. And during that time, there was fact checking as well of our scripts. And I found it interesting that there were some understandings of where Chinatown began, and that in fact, that wasn't that location and it was another place. And so it was really good to get our facts straight and get it from the communities themselves and the voices from the communities. And then something else that I found also interesting, and it's still something that we're navigating and trying to talk about, is now that we've developed this beautiful community, this cross-cultural community, say for instance, someone isn't available to do a tour and speak and represent their community. What is preventing from someone else in our group to sharing the script and sharing the story as a historian, as a tour guide? And this issue of representation comes into play, and it's something that not everyone feels comfortable with, but that's part of the beauty of talking and building trust with one another, and seeing what we can build together. So I see a question here, not to take away your job, Judith, but it's like, what are your plans for the future post-COVID, or I don't know, during COVID? Who knows how long this is going to stay on for? But I can tell you that when we went from 17 partner organizations to 31, immediately I was thinking to myself, well, we already knew we were going to be more than 17 for May 2020. This is before we knew COVID was hitting. And we already made plans to split the tours into a northern arc and into a southern arc, because we had so much content and everyone had so much information. You already just had like a little snippet of what we offer. We couldn't have every voice represented equally, or just, it would just be too crammed. So now we have to reimagine, well, are you going to have just like this portion of the tour with only these communities and that? And to answer your question, I really look forward to the feedback when you fill out the post-event evaluation after the event. To make our tour sustainable. Also, would you come out in a COVID world that is like today, if it's safe to do so? These are questions that we need to know and are asking ourselves, our communities, because we're all, I think, trying to figure that out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we're all thinking about that and trying to work it out. There's so much uncertainty still, but yeah, definitely there'll be the opportunity for everyone to fill out survey about this event, and those questions will be in there. So really appreciate any feedback everyone's able to offer to us.
Just to leapfrog on what Carmel said, we began this tour in Strathcona, which is the oldest residential neighborhood, has so much rich history from all these diverse communities, but intercultural history exists in all corners of the city. And this is a conversation that we, the organizing committee, have had for, I don't know, 2 years trying to figure it out. But there's the potential there that we could do different cross-cultural tours of Oak Ridge, Kitsilano, East Van, different, Commercial Drive, that would each be a different combination of maybe 2 or 3 different ethnic communities, and the overlapping histories that exist in those neighborhoods. So you could end up having a whole suite of 8 different tours in different corners of the city, all anchored in these same histories. And then you could go to one neighborhood and get some of it, and then a few weeks later go to a different neighborhood and get something that builds on that knowledge base. So there's just so much potential for where this program can go. We're really excited to get back to the drawing board and conceptualizing all the different paths we can take.
Yeah, no, there's lots of potential there, and that actually is a good point to explore a little further. I know we've talked about before, there's a lot of change coming to this neighborhood, to the Strathcona neighborhood particularly, and with the tours, it's sort of put a bit of a spotlight on the many histories there and how that comes together. But with change coming with the new hospital site and a lot of development around that, and also efforts to have Chinatown recognized by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site. What do you feel are the implications, for the diverse histories of the area, with a lot of change on the horizon and so on? Is it something that can be drawn on to really and brought into that future development of the area? Does anyone like to comment on that?
Yeah, I definitely think it's actually an exciting time in that regard, because things are going to be moved, and when you move things, you unearth things. And so people actually get more passionate and more clear about what is important to them and why. And I think that there has been a lot of passivity in relation to certain things of what is important to us and what people want to see moving forward. But culture and something that definitely needs to be preserved. And I think that any city builders or developers moving into these areas, I think they have a responsibility to sit down with the community members and actually have a conversation about like what is actually important to you. Like, what do you want to see? Because if I'm going to be designing this space, it's more so instead of me design and you just live in it, it should be a plan with, live with. Like, we're planning together, and so that you're going to live here and you're going to feel comfortable here. Because a lot of spaces can be very hostile because the way that they were created and inception of the creation was not ever taking into account people's cultural histories or religious proclivities. So I think that definitely with all the cultural awareness that we have now, I think there's a real good potential to right some wrongs as well as create new bridges and connections within the spaces, and I guess initiate like a new energy, like this space, it can be the Japanese center, but everyone can actually partake in that. If they feel inclined to learning about that history, they should feel comfortable in entering those spaces. And I think that that's something potentially maybe utopian, but I think that ideally we want to have those type of sentiments moving forward, because we share this land, and this land is important to everyone. And I think that everyone should have the right to say what they want to do or access to what they want to do, especially with COVID, because right now it's like, what are you going to do with public space? Because there's only so much public space, and there's all these restrictions now about how you can operate in public space. So who gets more access? Does this person, because they've been here longer than this person, or like where does that come through? And I think that those type of conversations are uncomfortable, but I think are necessary. And as much as expedient as we want this process to be, I do think that there is going to be some time required in order to make sure that people feel comfortable with what's going to happen moving forward.
Greater awareness is a very good starting point, I think, for getting more knowledge and understanding of the different histories, for sure, is really important start. Carmel, you wanted to comment?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I was just snapping my fingers, agreeing with Cora. Yeah, with our tours, though, I think it's a great example of being able to offer tangible and intangible forms of heritage on our walking tour. We have areas that have already been vacated by a community, or has been completely impacted by urban renewal and like completely shooed away. But then we also have Chinatown, as well as some existing buildings in the Powwow Street area that we can show. So there's a way for these tours to develop and to be flexible and, you can throw whatever new buildings you want at us. The history is still there. We still have living memory, and our community voices will continue to be strong. And many of us are the torchbearers of our family's histories and our community's histories. So I don't see those stories going away anytime soon. So as long as we continue to be loud and proud, I'm sure we'll be heard.
Mm-hmm.
I want to just counterpoint a little bit what Cora and Carmel are saying, but I mean, I believe in the optimism that you're saying, but I think that we are at an inflection point where we as citizens, not just the 6 of us, but the broader city, can really get it right or really get it wrong. As was mentioned, there's a UNESCO bid in the works for recognition of Chinatown, which is amazing and wonderful, as well as talks of taking down the viaduct and rejuvenating Hogan's Alley, also wonderful. But I think that the way that those plans come about and become reality could go either way, and is a really an outcome of who's in the room when those decisions are made, and who's consulted and who gets their voice heard. Because when there are big projects like that and big money on the table, people can either be greedy or generous. And so there is a risk that over the next 5-10 years, some communities get highly recognized and others get forgotten all over again. And so I think that the work that we've done over the past couple of years to build these partnerships and mutual respect and understanding amongst ourselves, we can be ambassadors to our respective communities. And by many people coming on the tour and gaining an appreciation or increasing their appreciation of this shared history, they too can be the ambassadors to say that there's a lot going on in that vicinity, and all of it needs to be recognized and remembered into the future. And I'm not saying that there needs to be necessarily a museum or a monument for every one of the communities, but there are ways that, as Carmel said, the intangible can be recognized. Tours can continue. Shared spaces that commemorate multiple communities can happen. I think there's a lot of creative potential there to really make the whole district of the city a exciting, vibrant, intercultural zone that everyone feels at home in. So it's up to us as Vancouverites to decide how that happens.
Mm-hmm. Michael, that's so true. And something that I wanted to also share is you're getting just a fraction of who's involved in this program. There are many other communities that have called Strathcona home. We've got the Italians, the Ukrainians, the Russians, the Indigenous, obviously the Indigenous community. I know I'm missing a whole bunch, but they're all listed in our 31 partner organizations. I'm sorry, I do not remember all of them off by hand. And then there's also the existing organizations in the area today that are doing wonderful things like language revitalization and music, like tons of different forms of education. So I needed to put that out there because you're just getting a little taste, because there's so much more.
Mm-hmm. Well, and with that, I think we're going to need to wrap it up for this evening. We really hope that we'll be back out doing live tours on the street next year. I think planning for spring again next year, right, Kamal? We hope. But we'll definitely find ways. I know as a group and a collaboration, ways will be found to keep the initiative going and to keep sharing the stories, the history, and having those conversations as well in the wider community. So with that, on behalf of everyone, I'd really like to thank our panelists this evening. So Carmel, Michael, Cor, Ainsley and Nicola. We really appreciate the presentations and your comments. And thank you as well, everyone else, for participating and putting in some questions and being here with us this evening. As mentioned, there will be a follow-up survey that'll go out in the next couple of days. So that's a chance to provide some feedback and any other comments that you have. And we really appreciate all of that. It helps us a lot, both in shaping our programming, but also obviously in providing some great input to the Cross-Cultural Walking Tours initiative as well. We do have other events coming up through Vancouver Heritage Foundation, so please do check out our website and the online resources. Just to mention a couple of events, there's a virtual walking tour this Saturday in the Cedar Cottage and Lakeview area. Only one walking tour guide, I'm afraid, but we can't quite match the effort of the cross-cultural walking tours at this point for that, but it will be great and really worthwhile joining us for that with historian John Atkin exploring that area. And then next Wednesday on the 21st, we'll be hearing from artist Deanna Bowen about her research into Black community history in Vancouver, including her own family connections and her artwork that she did for the Wall public art platform last year. So really an opportunity to learn a little more about local community history and the connections to be made. There is lots of information on our website, and so please do explore that. And thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to our panelists. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.